Francisco, let's start with you. Bring us up to speed on exactly where we are today in Venezuela. A lot of countries are coming around to support Mr. Guaido. What effect is that having?
Well, effectively, yesterday, 21 countries from the European Union recognized National Assembly President Juan Guaido as the interim president of Venezuela. That joins the countries in the Lima Group in Latin America, the U.S., Canada. So there's pretty much most of the important countries in the developed world and in the Western Hemisphere recognizing Guaido. However, Maduro appears to maintain the support of the Venezuelan military. We have to remember that the military is very centralized. A lot of it is infiltrated by the Cubans. So Venezuela is effectively a police state, and this has enabled him to maintain the support of the military, and I think that we may be headed towards a showdown and a confrontation. There's going to be an attempt this week to bring in humanitarian aid that has been promised by the U.S., Canada, and other European countries. It's being brought to the border of Venezuela and Colombia, and also the border of Venezuela and Brazil, and other points, but Maduro has vowed to stop it from coming into the country.
So, Ellen, how does this wind up playing out in terms of what Venezuela can actually do to make companies feel better, investors feel better, once something like this gets resolved?
Well, what we're seeing right now is that the interim president, or potentially the president-to-be, is going out there and he's making statements that are designed to basically say, look, once this whole situation is resolved and we have a new government, Venezuela is going to be open for business. He's even said that after they take control, that PDVSA, the national oil company of Venezuela, will no longer insist on being a majority holder in any joint ventures with other oil companies. And that's really significant because Venezuela's oil industry and its oil resources are really a very significant part of how the country can climb back economically from the terrible destruction they've seen. They really need to utilize this oil that they have in order to bring cash in to really reinvigorate other parts of their economy. But to do that, they're going to need to attract outside investment. And companies are only going to be willing to take the risk to go into Venezuela if they have assurances that this can be a profitable venture. So it does seem that the Guaido government, or government-to-be, is taking steps to try to reassure companies that, yes, if they come into power, Venezuela will be open for business.
How do they wind up, though, securing that kind of investment will still filter down to Venezuela and not just get recycled for the big oil companies, Ellen?
Well, that's the really big question, and what we've really seen is that the current government, Maduro, has really basically raided PDVSA and used all of the profits for that for his own benefit, and it's really been essentially like a kleptocracy, and so that will be a major part of the Guaido government. They will have to show that the people are receiving these benefits, and they're going to have to show it immediately. So people are going to need to feel the immediate benefits of that oil money on their lives.
So, Francisco, before we can get to a Guaido government, you have to get a Maduro government out. And if it's really up to the military, what will it take to switch the military?
It's very difficult. It's extremely difficult, and it may be that they do not switch. I mean, I think that that's a scenario that we have to consider very seriously, the possibility of Maduro hanging on to power despite economic sanctions. It wouldn't be the first time that we see this happen, right? The problem, again, as I said, is that power in the military is very centralized. Venezuela is a police state. So even though I think that the majority of the generals want him out, they may still not be able to coordinate on a coup. In fact, there are 100 military officers right now in prison in Venezuela because the government discovered that they were participating in a conspiracy to overthrow Maduro last year. Furthermore, a lot of the generals that he's put in command of troops are also sanctioned by the U.S. They're on the OFAC list. So these are the guys who have the highest exit cost. You have to have a strategy in Venezuela, and Guaido has begun to do this, where he's promising the military that turn on Maduro amnesty. You have to have a way to lower the exit cost. If not, then they're all going to rally around Maduro.
What can international pressure continue to do to help or hurt, actually, going forward?
I think it's a delicate game. I mean, I think it's quite difficult because sanctions are a double-edged sword. Sanctions can put pressure on the regime, but sanctions also starve Venezuela of a foreign exchange revenue. And you have to remember that this economy essentially only produces oil. So this economy consumes food and medicines that are paid for with the oil exports. It's not like there's a private sector producing anything else in this economy. So if you slap on oil sanctions and this lasts for a very long time, that is, if Maduro doesn't leave, then you have a real problem in terms of the ability of the economy to fund food imports. That's why one of the suggestions that we have is that the international community, and I made this recently with a co-author, Jeffrey Sachs, in the New York Times, is that the international community should design a food for oil program, as was done in Iraq, to allow not only under international monitoring, but also under joint monitoring of the de facto Venezuelan government of Maduro and of the interim government of Guaido, the use of revenues from oil exports in order to fund food and medicine imports.
So, Ellen, finally, are there any sources of foreign exchange for Venezuela at this point at all, given the sanctions we put on with respect to U.S. oil?
Well, that's really been the issue, because one of the main sources of foreign cash for Venezuela was its oil trade with the United States. Other oil that it's been selling to Rosneft and also to Chinese interests has really been going just to pay interest on its loans to these interests. So now that the oil trade with the United States is essentially cut off, unless they do succeed in selling this gold and getting euros for it, there really isn't any other source of cash for the Maduro regime at this point.